Evening, everyone. It's great to see everyone. My name, Karen Schaefer, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Council of Metropolitan Area Leagues of Women Voters, a fine organization established in 1962. And as everybody here probably knows, we focus in a political but nonpartisan way upon all issues affecting the seven-county metro area. And tonight's program, um, before we get started, I'm going to ask everyone to mute. I think practically everybody is. We've all learned our Zoom manners quite well. And even turn off your video so we can focus on our speakers. And I have prepared questions for our panelists, I in connection with others. But we always invite our audience to insert uh, questions into the chat function, and I will monitor that. And time permitting, we will get to at least some of those questions. We are going to end at 8, and we'll just sort of see, how the time goes. We have an outstanding panel this evening to help us become more informed about the financial pressures raining down on our metro area county governments, especially in light of recent changes and upcoming changes in the federal financing, federal budget, and in program changes as well. So I would like to introduce and let you know who we have. We have Ling Becker. Ling is the Ramsey County Manager, the only home rule county in Minnesota, and she's the manager. We have Kevin Corbett. Kevin is the county administrator for Washington County. And we have Will Wallo. He is the financial services director of Dakota County. So we are certainly graced with a panel of top county, metro county leadership. So I'm sure we're going to get a lot of interesting insights. What I'd like, and I have gone over some of these procedures with our panelists. I'd like to give each panelist a minute or two to introduce themselves to you and to give a sense of their role in their county, and everybody can get their vocal cords all warmed up. So maybe Ling, we'd start with you if you'd be so kind.
Yeah, thank you so much, Karen. Can everyone hear me? I appreciate the invitation very much. It was great to hear a little bit of the history of the League of Women Voters. I actually was an active volunteer when I was in college way back when, so I certainly
Mm.
appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all. So I also had a chance to join the Ramsey County advocacy team on December 1st. I don't know if anybody here is from Ramsey County, but they've many of the different branches or the subsections of the cities in Ramsey County all came together and they all focused on a couple of issues in the space. And so it was a really good event. So I look forward to the conversation today. As Karen said, I'm the county manager for Ramsey County. Because we're the home rule charter, my job description is the county manager. It's more notable that around the state, they're called county administrators. We are the second largest county in the state of Minnesota. We have about 550,000 residents. We have 4,000 employees. We have a county board of 7 elected officials that represent different districts within our county, and they hire one employee, and that's me, and then I manage the rest of the organization. So I've been a county manager for about a year and a half. Before that, I was the workforce director for the county for 6 years. And I have worked in some sort of public sector or public sector aligned work since I was about 15 years old when I caught the bug working at the community center in Eden Prairie, popping popcorn, and took on an internship in the city manager's office. And then basically did different roles that kind of all intersected government most of my career. So thanks for having me. I look forward to having a conversation about some of our very pressing needs and your interest in that. So thanks, Karen.
Thanks, Ling. How about you, Will?
Thanks, Karen. And yes, thank you for having me here tonight. I'm thrilled to be here. My name is Will Wallo. I'm the Financial Services Director for Dakota County. I've been in my role only a relatively short time. I've been there since June of last year, so about 7 months. Prior to that, I served as the CFO of the St. Paul Public Housing Agency for about 3 years. A little bit about where I fit into Dakota County's org structure. So as the financial services director, I oversee the annual budget process development and help coordinate the 5-year CIP. I report to our deputy county manager, David McKnight, who unfortunately wasn't able to be here tonight, who reports to Heidi Welsh, our county manager. So that's a little bit about where I fit into the structure. For a little bit more background on Dakota, third largest county in the metro area, about 450,000. Yeah, that's kind of what I got for an intro. Thank you.
Thanks, Will. And Kevin.
Thanks, everybody, and good evening, and thank you for inviting us to take part in this tonight. We are the little kid on the block. So Washington County is the 5th largest county in Minnesota, so smaller than Ramsey and Dakota. We've got about 285,000 residents in our county, and we have about 1,500 employees. Something a little unique about Washington County is that we are bordered on 2 sides, both the east side and the south side, and a part of our west side by rivers. So the St. Croix River on the east and the Mississippi on the south and southwest part of the county. We also are very unique in that we've got a vast difference between the west side of our county and the east side of the county. The west side is very developed with some of our largest, more dense cities of Forest Lake and Hugo and Oakdale and Woodbury and Cottage Grove and others. And our east side of our county is very rural in nature with small communities like Marina and St. Croix and Afton and Denmark Township and a lot of townships that are very sparsely populated. I've worked my entire career in the public sector, like many others here at Washington County. Ling mentioned she got the bug when she was young. I think I got the bug very young. My father ran for the state house when I was 3 and got elected. So I hung around the Capitol from about age 4 through 7 or 8 when he was done being a state house member. And then when I got to college, I got my first job at the Capitol. So really been in the public sector my whole life. I've been with Washington County for 25 years. I was the director of the Property Records and Taxpayer Services Department, which does the elections, tax collection, assessor, license centers, kind of your general county services department. So I did that for 11 years. I had the privilege of doing 3 countywide, 2 statewide election recounts at that time. So some of the biggest recounts in the state's history. Tremendous learning opportunity. I then served 8 years as deputy county administrator in the county, and now I am just completing my 6th year as county administrator. So again, thank you for inviting us tonight, and hopefully we can give you some good information about the county budgeting process tonight.
Thanks, Kevin. Well, let's get right into the substance of our panel tonight. Because our focus is financial, I'm going to ask our panelists to give us a little bit of insight on what their last budget process was like. We all know that counties must by law establish their next year's budget and their next year's tax levy in December. So we're just in January. So these county officials, they've just come off the budget and taxation process from last fall. Can you tell us what your process was like? We don't need all the details. And I was curious if it was different last year in any particular way that you'd like to mention. And maybe we'll start with Will.
Thank you. Yeah, so I can't speak tons about the history at Dakota County, just having joined relatively recently beyond, kind of what I understand the process to have previously been. I know we started much earlier in the year developing the 2026 budget. Typically in prior years, things would really not kick off till July, August at the earliest. We really started building out forecasts to get in front of the board about March, April. And we really prioritized doing a lot of out year forecasting, which was a new thing in this most recent budget process. We'd been typically focused on just looking at the next year's budget. Last year, we implemented a 5-year levy forecast that we've carried forward now looking into 2027 through 2031. We also had a lot more engagement with department directors. Last year was a very challenging budget year, as I'm sure it was for a lot of folks around the metro area. We had roughly $8.5 million worth of levy cuts that we made during the budget process, and we reduced our headcount by about 44 FTEs. So it was a pretty dramatic departure and shift from kind of how the budget process had worked in Dakota in the past. And I can say we're actually already starting the 2027 budget development process. So we're really bringing things kind of aggressively earlier into the year to get in front of the board early with even if we don't have full information, get them a preliminary understanding of kind of like what the situation on the ground is so they feel fully informed as we get closer to the end of the year and setting the max levy.
Thanks, Will. Kevin, how was it in Washington County?
Well, I'd say the process was very similar in 2020 to set the 2026 budget as it has been in previous years. The challenges were greater. The process wasn't a whole lot different. One of the things that's unique in county government and budgeting, I think, is that we're oftentimes working in 3 different budget years. So we just will be closing our 2025 fiscal year, at the end of December, but we won't actually close our books until probably sometime in early March. So you're finishing up your work in 2025's budget year. We're now in the 2026 year, so we're managing that budget. And in March, we'll start our processes here of creating the 2027 budget. So you're always kind of working in 3 different calendar years at the same time, which is confusing at times and challenging at times, but it gives you an idea of how long that process is for each budget year. A couple of things I would say about the county's process in 26 is that we had a ton of unknowns. Now, that's not unique, that usually we have some unknowns in a budget year as we're putting it together. I'd say this year was different. One, we have to negotiate our contracts with our employees, and we didn't have settled contracts. So that was an unknown about how much our employees were going to cost us for 2026 during calendar year 25 when we were creating this budget. We also had the challenge of not understanding much of what was happening at the state level around human services programs and how the cuts that were suggested were going to affect the county. And then later in the year, we had the addition of the federal cuts and the cost shifts being kind of placed at our feet and having to understand what that might look like. So all of those things created situations where there was much more of an unknown component to the budget than we typically have. And I would say all of those unknowns had huge potential for fiscal impact. And so, as we worked with our county board throughout the year, we had to make sure that we were communicating on all those 3 kind of items and how it was going to affect their decision in September to set their preliminary levy. So I think that's the process. We have a lot of work that we do early in the year to work with the commissioners to get a sense of where they are from a political standpoint and what they think the levy can be in the county. We work very hard with our department heads then through early summer. And then July, August, the departments do a lot of work with the boards, giving them all the detail on the budget so that they're prepared for September's setting of the preliminary levy. Our practice has been that we tend to set a preliminary levy where we think the budget needs to be for the year, unless there is significant, issues brought forward to the board. We don't usually make a lot of changes when we adopt the final budget in December. We try to do as much work as we can early on so the citizens and the folks that own property have a good idea of what the impact might be for them for the following year.
Thanks, Kevin. And Ling, if you would.
Yeah, of course. So we have a little bit of a different process than what Will and Kevin described. We actually have a biennial budget, which we're grateful for because this year, instead of doing some of that work now that Will and Kevin are doing, we actually spend kind of the second year of our budget planning working on performance metrics to make sure that our money that we're spending is getting outcomes, if that makes sense. So we actually put together a 2-year budget when we go through our biennial budget process. So we do repass a levy every year and can make some adjustments, but we actually have done the bulk of the budgeting one time every 2 years. So a little bit different and helps us to kind of get a little bit of bandwidth to do some other things actually instead of just be budget cycle to budget cycle. And I'm sure Will and Kevin can attest to that pressure a little bit. But for us, very similar in terms of the pressures. I'll say, just speaking metro wide, as I know you guys are from other places and we don't have some of the other metro counties here, but I think we all hit some historic higher levy marks than we typically have. Many people were close to 10, and when we first put out our max tax levy, which we do by the end of September every year, we were at 9.75. Our board did do a first time kind of an addenda process, we called it, where we went through and did some additional cuts. So when they actually passed their budget in December, it was actually at 8.25. So we brought it down like 1.5%. So for us, a percent on our levy is $4 million. If that gives you some context as we're thinking about how much money we need to sort of, how much levy we need to sort of meet the demands of the cost increases that are happening. There were 3 drivers of our budget, one being obviously some of those federal and state mandates and cost shifts, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. And this is actually our easier year, I'll have to say. I think the harder years are coming, based on the kind of the state sort of structural deficit and then what we're looking at federally as well. We also did a fairly large, what's called a class and compensation modernization exercise or effort. We, with our 4,000 employees, we actually compared against 9 core competitors on wages and got most of our employees at like the 60% mark, which is really good for us. We were kind of low on many job titles and we had a lot of vacancies. And so it actually costs a lot of money to have vacancies, and it costs in overtime and things like that, or just, less service. And it also costs a lot of money to keep training and sort of rehiring people too. So it was an investment in our employees, but actually when you think about counties being the social safety net, as one of our key roles, without the employees and the staff, we really aren't delivering those services. So our board decided to make that investment. And similar to Kevin, we have we had our labor negotiations as well, and there's a lot of costs increasing in terms of health insurance and all the things to just run a business. But we have 21 labor unions, and so we have to manage that. Every 3 years, we have to negotiate all those contracts, and obviously that can be pretty volatile depending on what people need for us to settle those contracts. And then the last thing is just increased demand. I mean, we serve a very a population with a lot of needs. And I will say certainly at this time, we continue to see increasing needs for county services. I know the pandemic seems like a while ago, but as kind of the past workforce director with that hat on, there's kind of this concept of scarring where, young people or adults, people who kind of experience some kind of like significant trauma or disruption in learning or work. It takes a quite a bit to sort of, for some people to sort of re-engage and get back on track in terms of the same kind of income making trajectory that they were on. And so, we're also finding, the current situation to be challenging as well with, more young people going back to online learning. So it just, all these things kind of compound on top of a community that, has had a lot of significant disparities anyway around zip codes and race and ethnicity. So our demands are high, for a lot of our services when it comes to human services and other things. I'm trying to think of the other budget thing I'll tell you that's unique to Ramsey County is just our geographic makeup. We are a fully developed county, probably the most fully developed in the state of Minnesota. We have 19 cities in the smallest sort of density in terms of, or smallest square mileage. We're very close together. All our redevelopment projects or all our development projects are complicated. They require a lot of cleanup and expense and work to get them moving. And that's the basis of the property tax, right? And so I think one thing maybe all three of us will talk about is counties are really dependent on property tax to fund as our primary source of revenue, to fund our services. And for Ramsey County, we have a couple of things working against us. We have the significant amount of redevelopment that we have to do, not having green space. We also have the highest amount of property that's tax exempt in the metro. So when you think about the state capital, you think about all the colleges and universities and the nonprofits. So we actually don't have as much taxable land compared to other communities. And obviously downtowns have also experienced quite a bit of a challenge post-pandemic, and that's really a core to like a county like Ramsey. So all those factors really make it difficult when one of your biggest tools to fund human services or all the things you're doing is the property tax. About 47% of our budget is paid with is funded through property tax, and so that's significantly higher than say Hennepin County. So just for context, so those are some of our kind of unique challenges around our budget.
Thanks, Lynn.
Yeah.
So, okay, we've all read or heard about and probably discussed what some people call the Big Beautiful Bill. It has other names, a Big Terrible Bill, and other names which I will choose not to quote here because it's not polite. But this was the budget that the Congress passed last spring and the president signed. So that bill, as we know, that budget bill includes substantial changes to Medicaid, which in Minnesota we call medical assistance, and federal nutrition programs. And these changes are scheduled to take place in 2027. They're not taking place now. They're scheduled for next year. So from our panelists, we would like to know what is your sense of how drastic these changes might actually be, and what is your county doing now to prepare for these changes? So maybe we'll give Kevin the first shot out of the gate.
All right, I'll take a shot at both those questions. One thing that, I've been around county government a long time, and I think I was part of the budget process during the Great Recession back in 2008, 9, and 10, been through COVID. We learn our lessons quickly that you cannot wait for a problem to get there before you start preparing, or it's way too late. We also learned that there was a time when the state did an allotment, if you recall that, a number of years ago, where we got cut in December and we were already all the way through our budget year. So we've learned we've got to get ready. So we knew this was potentially going to be a difficult budget year in 26, but likely worse in 27 and 28. So some of the things that we started doing at Washington County was slowing hiring in all but the most critical areas. So we didn't cut positions in Washington County, but instead of adding our typical 25 or 30 new employees each year to keep up with population growth and service demand, we actually only added a net of 3 positions. So very much slowed new hiring in 2026. We also had a number of employees, mostly in our human services area, that were being paid by federal funds from the COVID pandemic still, what was called the ARPA funding. And so we put a lot of our money towards keeping those positions on because they were in critical areas in human services, but transitioning them off the federal money onto the county funding or the state and federal reimbursement. So that was a second thing that we did. We also did some intentional work to try to increase what's called our fund balance, which are our reserves. So I believe that you're going to have some reserves in place to deal with the type of cuts we're seeing in 27 and 28, because we just aren't going to be able to handle them all with people cuts and or changes to our service delivery. So we canceled a couple capital projects and put that money back kind of in the piggy bank so we can have that money to help us handle cuts in human services in 27 and 28. I'll answer real quickly. How bad do you think it's going to be? I think it is going to be significant. It's going to be severe, but I'm hoping we don't get worst case scenario. Worst case scenario on the type of shifts that could happen from paying a portion of the SNAP benefits that are paid to our residents, or paying for a portion of the costs for Medicaid, or just the work that we're going to need to manage these caseloads if there are the large changes related to requiring work, and how much that's going to affect our workload on eligibility and review of cases. So I hope we don't get the worst case scenario. I know the state has literally no money in the out years, but we are hoping that they'll be part of the solution and not make the counties carry all of the burden on any kinds of cuts. So we're hoping for not worst case scenario. We're preparing for significant and severe, I guess is how I would put it. Just real quickly, to give you some context in Washington County, 150 million is our levy each year. Our operating budget is just under 400 million. The federal money we take in 2026 is equal to about 40 million. 13 or 14 million of that is for one road project. So that's kind of unique this year. But the other part of that, so about 26 million is ongoing federal money that's mostly in our community services and public health departments. And those are the dollars that are at risk and or the areas that have the most risk for increased expenses. So just gives you some context of what we're dealing with.
Thanks, Kevin. Ling, maybe you would give us your assessment.
Yeah, I wish I had better news, but I'll start at a little high level here for you. We're all a part of an organization called the National Association of Counties. They have a wonderful website that actually talks about this. I'll put it in the chat when I'm done. But really, what we're looking at is what's been termed the big shift, which is $1 trillion over the next 10 years from federal government down to local level governments. So whether it's state or local, we're looking over 10 years, $1 trillion. That's pretty significant when we are, based on the current pressures we already have, just in terms of just managing the budget right now on the backs of the property tax, as I had mentioned. And so we're going to have a lot of things to talk about in terms of whether, what we're going to have to do. I agree with Kevin, like we're not going to be able to, there's so many mandated things that we have to do. And really, we're focused now on core county responsible services. Like, unless it's something we absolutely is a county function, I'm re-looking at whether or not, we need to be in that business, honestly. So just with this past budget, we got out of doing, we were operating a detox and withdrawal management program, and we found out that we were only one of two counties that was operating a direct withdrawal management and detox program. So we saved $2 million by eliminating 45 employees and closing that down because it's been a money loser for us, So, I mean, we have to do some of those hard things, but those are really difficult things to do in local government when you think about letting employees go, and it's complicated. And so we're gonna have a lot of those hard decisions to make. And so some of the things that, that NACO, deck or that information says, like, counties have basically a few choices. They can cut or scale back critical services, which include public health, emergency response, nutrition, all the things that people rely on counties to do. We can continue to deliver services, but maybe at a new cost, given the elimination of funding and statutory requirements to uphold certain services. We could raise local taxes to cover the new costs or increase fees. And that's, a little bit of what we've all tried to do is raise some taxes. We can delay or cancel infrastructure or resilience investments, which is what kind of Kevin was saying. Maybe they had, some deferred maintenance or some capital projects, but, you're going to put them off, which, they come back to bite you later. I mean, you just, it's like, you don't fix your car for 5 years, you're going to, end up in a worse state. Things cost more later too. And then absorb long-term, economic and social consequences for the unfunded programs, which, I really believe we are in the business of helping people thrive in their communities, helping them get opportunities and stay in their well-being. And the more we delay on doing those things, they show up in other parts of systems that we don't want people to be in, whether it's our criminal justice system or our child welfare system. So, if we don't kind of care for the people at their time of need, it sometimes shows up in other ways that are very costly as well. So, similar to Kevin, I think we do have a fair, we've been very fiscally moderate or restraint over the last, both are out of the average of the last 5 and 10 years. We have only been higher than Dakota County. Dakota County's kept a very low levy. We've basically been really close to that, but but the key with the property tax, and I think Kevin and Will could speak to this, it's steady wins the race here. You don't want big ups and downs. You want a steady kind of a, ideally I would say 3 to 5%, generally just keeping pace with things so that you don't end up in these situations, and that helps you kind of create some fund balance. Hopefully, if you manage your budget well for the rainy day, and the rainy day is coming. I mean, like I said, everybody in the metro experienced an extremely hard budget for their 2026 budget. As you stated, or as somebody stated, 2027 is actually when the first things kind of hit. Really, much of our impact had to do with existing costs that many of us had, and some state cost shifts around a few things, so we haven't even hardly hit the tip of the iceberg, and we're going to have to figure a way to manage. I will say that in terms of the federal impacts, one of the ways we're responding is we actually created almost like, some of you might be familiar, like when you're in an emergency, you kind of create like what's called an incident management team, where you bring like lots of resources and people to help you like plan and think through how you're going to solve this really complex problem or the situation. We have something kind of a step or a step and a half below that. It's called the Federal Response Action Team. And we have a bunch of people who all they do as like part of their work is analyze all these federal impacts, whether it's attorneys, whether it's fiscal people. We're thinking about contingency planning, because we've had to do that for the whole last 2025, whether it's been federal actions, whether it's been the federal shutdown, so we're getting a strong muscle on kind of trying to think through how to plan for a change in federal and state funding. Now, that doesn't help us actually solve the problem per se, but we have a good way to at least understand the impacts and to think through some kind of contingency planning. But at the end of the day, when the well is dry, it's dry. You know what I mean? You can plan all you want, but the bottom line is, we got a lot of employees that are in services that are tied to these federal and state dollars. So hopefully that's helpful. And I'll turn it back over to you, Karen.
Thanks, Ling. And Will, if you would.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. It's funny that Kevin and Ling both mentioned fund balance, because unlike Washington and Ramsey, Dakota has not prepared well for the rainy day. So we're in a little bit of a unique situation where, yes, we had a low levy for a long time. We've had to increase the levy a lot higher than historic norms the past 2 years, because we were not raising taxes enough to keep up with the growth in the county and keep up with the growth in expenditures. So when we're looking at things we're implementing this year to prepare for these cuts that we know are coming, cuts and cost shifts in 27 and 28, we are being a little bit more like proactive and maybe taking a little bit more drastic measures. So we have pretty much delayed all of our facilities and parks capital projects that are non like emergency or have outside funding associated with them. We also have a hiring slowdown in place that we've been basically doing since last summer. We're also really reevaluating some of our look like coming back through all of our programs that are attached to mandates, looking at our non-mandated programs and services. What's tough is that in Dakota we do a survey of all of our residents on about a 3-year basis, and we always see that parks and libraries are our most popular services that we provide. And unfortunately, those are the things that are not mandated and they're heavily subsidized by property tax levy. So those are challenging things and challenging conversations that we're starting to have. Yeah, that's how we're trying to address proactively some of these issues. We have been forecasting what we think the financial impact of some of the provisions in HR1, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act are. We've been revising these over the past couple of months, but we just went through a process with our employment and economic assistance team of reevaluating some of the numbers. We think that with the rule changes for MA and SNAP, we are going to need to, if we want to fully comply and keep caseloads the same that they are right now, we are going to have to add FTEs, and that's going to come at a pretty significant cost. We're estimating.
Well, I'm going to ask you to tell people what MA is, and what SNAP is, and what an FTE is.
Sorry.
I
Yeah, I throw around acronyms maybe a little too loosely. Sorry about
well,
that.
I'm just being a little bit rude. Because what the point you're making is important, and that's the only reason I suggest it.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you. I am guilty of, getting caught up in the acronyms. So MA is just medical assistance. That's the Medicaid program here in Minnesota, and SNAP is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, the food program here in the state, and then FTE, full-time equivalent employee. So we're talking about adding staff to fully comply with the requirements that are in HR1 relating to the supplemental nutrition program and Medicaid. And we're anticipating, assuming that we get some amount of federal financial participation attached to those positions that we add, that would be about $4.5 to $5 million a year in ongoing costs associated with complying with that. And then the SNAP administrative cost share, that's decreasing from 50% down to 25%. We're anticipating right now that's going to have about a $1 million impact per year on Dakota County. And then the kind of big one is the change in the SNAP benefit cost rate, or the SNAP error rate calculation. That could be shifting, a portion of the cost of SNAP benefits onto county governments. And we're estimating, and again, a lot of this is worst case scenario planning. There's a lot of uncertainty still attached with this. That's going to be in the realm of about $4 million a year in ongoing costs. So right now, in our 5-year forecast, we're anticipating between 27 and 29, adding about $10.5 million onto the budget in that time frame, which that alone over that time period would be roughly about a 6% increase on the levy. And that's before we start factoring in things like that have been touched on earlier, like increases to compensation for our staff. That doesn't take into effect, inflation, just the general cost of doing business across our programs that we need to factor in. And then on top of that, we have, financial challenges that we're trying to address in terms of improving our fund balance position simultaneous to a lot of this happening. So it's a lot going on.
Wow, I guess so, and I appreciate Ling's mention of the NACO website for our audience. NACO is the National Association of Counties. All the counties, all through the states, join together in a collective activity, and their website. I didn't know about it myself, but that would be a good resource for people in our audience who would like to get into the nitty-gritty and see the changes that are anticipated. In addition to the medical assistance and SNAP, which are basically human service type services. Panelists, have you identified or heard about federal reduced support or changes in other programs besides the medical assistance and the food nutrition programs? Any other program areas or service areas where you have heard or read that might also experience some negative consequence because of action at the federal level? Maybe Ling, I'd give you a chance. If you haven't heard of any, that's fine. It's just, we've heard about medical assistance and food, but counties do a lot.
Sorry, I had to unmute. Yeah, absolutely. Just to even go back a year, I will say, this pressure of federal sort of impacts onto local governments started. And I like to put it into like a few buckets. There's kind of the direct impacts where we have funding threats or actually stoppages, at times, or things that got clawed back. And then there's kind of the indirect impacts. And I think some of you remember, probably in early 2025, there was a lot of the Doge, like federal employees were being let go. Those actually have some indirect impacts because when there's not people at the veterans office, sometimes it slows down the processing of things locally. So I would say those are a little bit indirect. And then also indirect might be like if the state kind of loses some funding when it comes to some road projects or something, because that's infrastructure that's in your local community. I would say that's also sometimes happening with federal actions. And then the last one's kind of the collateral impact. Like you've heard, Will, I think you didn't, I think you talked a little bit about working in government for a while too, but Kevin and myself, I mean, you think about people who've made a career out of public service, it's really kind of in jeopardy because of just the kind of the mar, the like kind of about government in general. Like people in government do a lot of hard work. They support their communities with sort of a service mindset and do so probably oftentimes at a foregoing salary they could get in like a private sector, working a lot of late nights and days at, city council levels or like at state levels, different things. And it's just, this was a hard year for just being in government, I will say, but in terms of, so that's, I don't always want to just say like the impacts are just money, even though I know you guys are having a budget section, there's a lot of psychological sort of pressure, you know what I mean? When all this stuff is happening every day, whether it's the shutdown or these orders. I will say another area that we should be keeping an eye on is housing. There has been some, back and forth. I would call these looming type threats and not so direct. But, when it comes to funds that go to our continuum of care, which is sort of it's called a continuum of care around homelessness. So it's a board that basically represents many different stakeholders in the community that manages our housing dollars that come into our area. There's some shifting around the funding that they supply to that ecosystem, the feds. And so for us, it would, in Minnesota, it would actually jeopardize permanent housing for about 3,900 Minnesotans, including hundreds of Ramsey County residents. And so it's really something, we might lose around 805 beds in housing programs that serve youth and single adults and families should that change continue or actually happen. And that could lead to more folks needing, being unhoused and needing other services. So that's probably another big one that we are watching in addition to Medicaid and SNAP. So
thanks, Ling.
Yeah. There's been a
Will,
lot of news on that one, so I could even post a couple of links or something if you find those that interesting. So it's a little quieter one, I will say, because it's a little technical, but it would impact Minnesota significantly.
and Will.
Thanks. Yeah, we're closely monitoring everything that's going on at the state in regards to the allegations of misuse of funds in various programs. I know there have been some attempts by the federal government to put pause or freeze on some funds that flowed to DCYF, Department of Children, Youth, and Families here at the state, which interacts very closely with and we receive funding for a number of programs in our social services department. So we're keeping an eye on that. I know that there's other streams of SNAP funding that have been targeted in various ways through similar actions beyond what's in HR1, through these like temporary pauses or freezes or requests for data and information. So, we're closely monitoring, working with the state to make sure we can continue operating these programs as we have been while this is kind of up in the air and in limbo. But yeah, we also know that there's been talk of federal funding to states that have sanctuary cities being targeted in February. That came out like a week or two ago. So it's just, it feels like every day we're just like learning something new and something new to keep our eye on and make sure we're at least paying attention to. But nothing as concrete as what was in HR1 at least at this point in time.
Okay. And Kevin.
Thanks, Karen. And I won't repeat because I think what Ling and Will said is correct. I would just add two other areas to keep your eye on. One is in the public health area. Coming out of COVID, there was significant investment made in this area around prevention and disease control and vaccinations and other kind of work our public health departments do. I expect there's going to be kind of a clawback or a slowdown in that area. And so we might have to adjust spending if federal money kind of changes in the public health area. The other one we're worried about is in the emergency management area. Some of the discussion around what the role of FEMA is and how we respond to disasters. We do get a lot of planning dollars from the federal government to help us plan for regional or county kind of level emergencies, natural disasters. And I expect that we're going to probably get less money for the federal government in that area. Maybe one kind of a lighter note to put in here is I always heard the phrase at the state capitol at times that if the state or federal government gets a cold, kind of gets sick, the counties cough. So they get sick and you're going to see us with the symptoms kind of a thing, because really their problems become our problems awfully quickly. So that's just a little bit to add on what else to watch out for.
Thanks, Kevin. I'd like to broaden the topic a little bit here with the next question and ask our panelists, what do you envision for the future of metro area county government, and not just with respect to federally supported services, but also county services in general. So I'm asking you, do you have any particular plans or thoughts about system redesigning kind of how county government works, or maybe reordering the relationship between the state and counties and how they divvy up the work and who pays for what? Or another thing that is frequently mentioned is upgrading of the IT systems in the human services area, or changes to outsourcing practices, kind of the big picture of how counties function in Minnesota. Any thoughts or maybe some planning activities that are going on? I'm thinking here there was a lengthy op-ed by a former revenue commissioner, John James, in the Star Tribune on November 23rd, 2025. And this was the kind of conversation I think that he was promoting among our state and local leaders. So it's a big question and in some ways philosophical. And Will, even though you're new at the county, I'm sure you have some thoughts on this.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a really, really big question. I think what we are kind of planning for and have been working towards at Dakota we really have made it this year our number one legislative priority that we try to advocate at the state for systems modernization. That's really one of the biggest challenges that we see. It's not just that the systems are challenging to utilize and like deliver the services for our residents, which is huge, but we also see it has a huge impact on our staff. When staff time is taken up using systems that are often offline or challenging to use, it creates a lot of turnover in our, kind of frontline service delivering areas of the county. And that's kind of where we would like if we could have the most stability. So we're really hopeful that we can drive that conversation this year and moving forward to really get some momentum behind addressing these systems and improving them and upgrading them moving forward. Beyond that, I mean, you mentioned, outsourcing at Dakota County. We already operate pretty lean, relative to some of our Metro County peers, just in terms of like the size of our operating budget relative to our population. We already do kind of a lot of outsourcing to nonprofits and some for-profit vendors in regards to our mandates. So, I mean, I could see that trend continuing just as we try to weather this storm. But yeah, that's kind of where we're at right now. We really hope that it can also address some of the issues that have come up recently in regards to, the claims of fraud and misuse of funds. If we have systems in place that allow us to better serve the public. So I think systems modernization is the big thing.
Kevin, what are your thoughts?
I'm going to start by giving some credit to Ling, who's on the call here. Ling has joined. We've got a Metro Administrators group that meets monthly to talk about kind of big issues in county government, and she's really been a driver in that group thinking about how we change what we're doing and kind of pushing us to think about this county administered, state supervised human services system, and if we can afford or if it's working the way it should. And so, those conversations are happening amongst the metro counties as well as the associations that help support us, like the Association of Minnesota Counties and others. So I do think that we are going to have that discussion about what counties do and what counties pay for, mostly because I think the property tax system in Minnesota right now is just under a unbearable amount of stress. I think even when we believe we are increasing the property tax levy moderately, it's clear that many people are struggling to afford property taxes in our region. And so one of the ways you address that is to look at what the property tax pays for. And I think right now it is overburdened. And part of that problem is the human services costs that are on the property tax. In most states in this country, the counties have a much smaller role, if any, related to human services administration and cost. And so state funds are usually paying for that cost. So I think we have to have this discussion. We have to look for ways to make it more efficient and effective. The question is really going to be what happens in those services or areas where, if you do have to have a personal contact with somebody, is it going to be okay to have that regionalized, or do you need to have that at every county courthouse, every county seat? We created county seats based on how far you could travel by horse and buggy in a day back in the day. That's different now, right? In the technology we use. And so we need to look at regionalizing some services. I agree with Will. System modernization has to happen. I think it is going to happen. It won't happen fast enough, and it's going to be very expensive. So I think, but that is going to happen. I'd also say on outsourcing, in my 25 years at the county, I've seen this pendulum swing a little bit. When I first started, we did very little. We went through a period where we used outsourcing a lot more with nonprofit groups and others. And now we're starting to see a little bit of a pendulum swing back to having permanent employees doing these functions. I think it really is looking at if it's a ongoing permanent demand for a service, it's probably better to have that done by people that are working for us and that we can train and manage and do all of that kind of work. If it's something that's short term or we just need some help because there's a spike in demand for services, using folks as outsourced, nonprofits or other types of companies certainly makes a lot of sense there. So that's a couple of things. So is the future going to look different? Yeah, it has to look different. I think, how different, that's probably the question that we're all going to answer in the next few years.
Thank you. And Ling, if you would.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciated what Kevin was saying, and I won't repeat all that, but there's again, I'm kind of the link person today, but there's a great article. Chuck Johnson, he used to be, the head of DHS. He wrote very articulately that, we got to meet the moment here. Like, this is a generational moment to like sort of reshift some things in Minnesota and actually ensure that people of all backgrounds can have prosperity. Because honestly, when you think about the property taxes Kevin described, the other thing is it's extremely regressive. And so the people that won't be able to bear that burden are going to be, people who typically haven't been able to own a home and they're kind of been on the margin and just happen to start to, make some headway in some of that. And so I think we all have some responsibility to doing some of this big work. The challenge is like, it's just really hard work. It's hard work because people have to hold some things loosely. I kind of wanted to answer the question of Wes. I feel like one of the biggest messages I have for everybody, whether it's an elected official or our staff, at this moment in time as a public sector employee or as an elected official, it's not about you. It is all, everything belongs to the taxpayer. You have to hold it pretty loosely. There's no like sacred cow programs. There's not a, activism sort of mentality. It's really, what can we squeeze out for the best services? And when I mean best, it also is not just the delivery, but also like who is getting the services and who needs it the most and has access. Those are all part of the evaluation. But at the end of the day, like we can't be too tied into anything that we think is special because there's going to have to be a lot of compromising and a lot of giving up, similar to what Kevin said. I think I would actually just say the word consolidation. There's going to have to be more, like you said, regional partnerships. We already have some good partnerships. We just re-signed a JPA this week with Dakota County where we do some of their TB testing, for example. They don't need to have a bunch of infrastructure to do TB testing if we can have that in Ramsey, and I think we do Washington's too. So it's, we can't do everything in Ramsey, but like what can Kevin do? What can Will do? And where do we sort of, each do some of our things and not have so much infrastructure and overhead to try to make those things happen. The other really unique thing that could happen in Minnesota, and there's a unique thing in Ramsey County or St. Paul that they've done at the legislature. They created for us a joint property tax sort of advisory committee. And our school district and our city of St. Paul and Ramsey County, our elected officials have to get together and talk about their property taxes. Because at the end of the day, you guys get a bill and it's not just the county, it's a lot of other people. And you're going to get the summation of all those charges, right? And so we can't just work in silos and vacuums. We have to think about, how, your city, your county, and your school district and some special districts are taxing each household. And we have to think about that, really really strategically. When we were at NACO this year and I went to one of the sessions, it was really fascinating to hear the different things that different states have around taxation. Like some states actually have put maximums on, how much a county can raise their property tax. So, I mean, we could be seeing a season where we have significant challenges around delivering services. We know that property taxes are a problem and have a legislature that feels that they have to do something. And instead of maybe solving the problem, they actually might, cut off the hand that helps the problem too by trying to be a little more, fiscally prudent, which I think we would all agree with. But we all have to kind of be at the table. And I will say on our legislative strategies, we have just a few things. One is the counties have to be at the table if you're going to come up with new ideas. The state legislators and the state kind of administration, they can't figure this out without counties being in the room, you know? And the other thing is like no more mandates, like do not make any more laws that you can't give us enough money to do, because we can't hardly do the ones that we already have, you know? And then before I forget, I just want to say one more thing around Wes's question. I think the bearer of bad news idea, besides that holding loosely and the things I shared, I think this is why meetings like this are really important. I'm sure we're all really tired tonight, Kevin, Will, and I, from a hard day, but I think it's important that we talk to groups like yours, because at the end of the day, you can be trusted messengers to share some of the tough news with the community. People don't want to always hear from their government officials about how hard it is and what are the pressures. But if we can educate people to share that information with us, that really helps. And right now we have a society where people have about an attention span of, a minute. And the things we're talking about are complicated. They actually require very critical thinking and an understanding of how things work, and asking really good questions like the ones you guys are asking tonight. And so, short of you guys helping us, we're not getting, it's hard to get those sound bites, because most people are like, property tax is bad, you know what I mean? And the county, we even struggle with explaining that just because we assess properties and send you the bill, that not all the money comes to us. So nevertheless, we can't even get into the complexity of the layers of what pays for, who pays for what, and what the challenges are, So we have a lot of communication and messaging challenges with people understanding the complexity. And sometimes unfortunately, it's too complex. But folks like you really help by understanding and wanting to dig in and talking to your neighbors and your family at the table and at holidays. It's really critical. So,
Karen, can I add one thing? We talk a lot tonight about the impact of these changes on the county budget and county government and the service we provide and our staff. But I think the other thing that county commissioners think about, as well as the staff and the leaders, is that if there are changes to the benefits that individuals that need help to get food or help to get housing or help to get services, if they're developmentally disabled, the impact on that person is going to be much more severe than it is on the county worker, on the county budget, on the county government. And so I think that's the other part that we're thinking about here, is not just the impact on us as the service provider, but the impact that's going to be felt by that person, and that also is going to impact us, because if they have a cut in a certain program and a need, they're probably looking to the county in other areas that we provide services and help, and that's going to push that demand and that cost up in a different area. So there's a lot of empathy, a lot of sympathy for people that are being impacted by the changes. And we need to think about them as we're making our choices too, as well as the fiscal impact for the property taxpayer and the leaders that are making decisions around how to go forward. And I know you probably all know that, but I just wanted to let you know that, that is something that we think about a lot, not just how it affects us as the governmental entity.
Thanks, Kevin. And Will, since Ling and Kevin have touched upon this question that we have in the chat, how you as senior leaders, when you have to bear bad news, how how you handle that, professionally and personally. And Ling and Kevin gave us a little insight. Did you want to add something?
Sure. Yeah, I can add just a little bit. It's not easy to be the bearer of bad news, but I think my style has been, just we have to be as transparent as possible about the issues that are in front of us. I mean, the county board can't make the policy decisions that they need to make if we're trying to, sugarcoat or maybe look through it with rose-colored glasses. We kind of lay it all on the table for them in our finance work sessions and at board meetings when we're presenting this information. We know that ultimately they are the decision makers. They have to make the hard decisions about the budget, about the property tax levy and where to set it. So just being as clear and as transparent as we possibly can, I think, is the strategy that we need to have to deliver that news.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Karen, and to add to Wes's question too, I'd say, we oftentimes are giving bad news to our county boards, but we want to make sure that they've got the information they need to make good decisions, as Will mentioned. But we also bring them solutions, right? We bring them solutions and options. And that's what I think from me professionally and personally, is the part that I enjoy the most. I don't enjoy the part about giving the bad news. I enjoy the part about identifying potential options and solutions that they can choose from, and then hoping we can help guide them to what we believe is the best decision for the folks that they serve, the folks that get the service. So that's the part that kind of keeps me going on this is, yeah, we're dealing with a lot of tough stuff, but being part of the solution and the option identification is really what I think is all of us in leadership hope that we can do and get some pride in that.
Thanks, Kevin, very much. So now I'm going to move on to I guess what we would say is another elephant in the room. It's not as though there's only one, but I'm referring to the Department of Homeland Security currently beleaguering our state and local communities and our residents too about the metro surge and they are doing it outstate as well. We have, of course, the press covers this a little bit. We understand that this Homeland Security initiative has cost the Minneapolis Police Department, I don't know, some enormous figure in overtime. And so that's going to affect the city of Minneapolis, for example. So my question to our panelists, um, are your counties experiencing any increased costs or either financial or maybe other costs as a result of Metro Surge and what those might be? And secondarily, or maybe as important, um, are you tracking, are these costs something that you can track or that you are tracking for future understanding? Um, so maybe I'd ask Kevin, can you start that off for us?
Sure, sure. I'll be honest with you. We have not identified a lot of hard financial costs yet that we've incurred because of the immigration enforcement activity. I can't point to revenue losses, large expense increases from this yet. I think that's different than some of the communities in the urban core, the cities, and maybe the two big counties. But from a Washington County perspective, we have not seen that. I can talk a little bit about some of the costs that we think is happening and some of the impacts on us. We clearly have county staff. We have 1,500 county staff. There are some of those employees that are being impacted by this surge of activities, and a small number will are having some concern about leaving home, getting in, working in the community where there's activities occurring. We've also seen that we've had clients that don't want to or won't show up for appointments. So in our WIC, our Women's, Infants, and Children's program, where we're doing vaccinations or well checks, where we'll have people signed up, but they do not show up. Or we'll have clients that we're doing home visiting with that are leery of any governmental worker coming to their home right now, and so they're canceling appointments. Our public health folks are worried about hearing from the hospitals and clinics that people are canceling doctor's appointments that they need to get at, and what's the impact on their long-term health from doing that. We also have an increase in calls to our crisis response line related to mental health and child protection. So that's happening a little bit. We did have an example where we needed to have child protection workers go out to a home to deal with children, that were impacted by the immigration enforcement activity. So we are seeing an impact. We are, trying to address some of those impacts on our clients that we're serving. Um, Maybe a good news story is in our license centers, we've seen a huge uptick of people who need to get passports. So our license centers have just been hammered the last couple of weeks. We had staff that have volunteered. We pay them, but they volunteered to come in for the next 4 Saturdays so we can do more passport appointments for folks who are looking for those documents. So at our Woodbury License Center, we're doing that, and we've already helped, I think, 100 or so families get documentation that they're looking to get. So, we're trying to respond the best we can. But the direct answer to your question, we haven't seen the large impacts on our finances, our revenues, or expenses yet related to this activity.
Okay. Thanks, Kevin. And Ling, how about Ramsey County?
Yeah, we're probably impacted in a little bit of a different way, but I will say because the incidents have primarily been in Minneapolis, the most significant incidents of the deaths have been in Minneapolis. We also do not have such large costs per se. I will say where we've seen some changes is like we have event rentals like at Aldridge Arena and places like that where some cultural groups aren't holding events, or like we've had events canceled at Landmark Center, which we also run. So more that kind of thing. But Kevin's spot on what he's saying. Like my approach to handling the situation is really focused on staff well-being and also the continuity of services, really. So we are almost in I wouldn't say the same as a COVID mode, but we definitely have shifted a lot more things to virtual right now to ensure more access for people. I will say the one good silver lining after COVID is we built some good muscle and continued to have, multiple ways where people can get in touch with us, including virtual and more phone. And that's been good. And we can just continue to push on that a little bit more and be really thoughtful. Like, for example, I know MnDOT, we kind of followed their example, some of their public engagements around road construction or something, we can hold some of those virtually so that people don't have to leave their home to do that. I think it'd be good for you guys to know the statistic. We were with our school district, St. Paul, our largest school district this week. 7,000 students are doing online learning. They have 35,000 students. So that's pretty significant of families that either have some disruption or reason to need to stay at home. And so that has a toll on a community, those types of things. So not a direct county cost, but certainly concern about staff well-being, mental health, community well-being, all the things Kevin said about WIC and appointments and all those things, so yeah.
Okay, thanks you. And Will, how about in Dakota County?
Yeah, so similar, Ling mentioned COVID. We actually at Dakota have set up incident command structure, reporting to our senior leadership team. So our public health director is our incident commander. And while we haven't seen
Will,
yeah,
I'm going to ask you to tell people what an incident commander is.
yeah. So
Yes,
for
just because I
continuity,
can.
yeah, for continuity of operations, this is like it's used in FEMA and a lot of like responses to like natural disasters or public health emergencies, similar to COVID, where you have like a designated individual and group of individuals reporting to that incident commander, really focused on whatever the issue is at hand. So for us, we've just defined the incident as Operation Metro Surge and continued federal presence in the Twin Cities metro area. And so that group, which I said is led out of our public health team, but has staff from, across the county staffing various components of it. They're meeting daily to kind of get updates on the situation. There has been obviously presence in different areas in Dakota County, not obviously to the extent as we've seen in Hennepin. But we are tracking costs related to it. There haven't been significant direct financial costs to the county yet. Like we haven't seen huge spikes in overtime for our sheriff's department. We've incurred some costs related to like generating signage. but really, I think we're seeing a lot of indirect costs. Like I said, just by setting up this structure, we are diverting a lot of staff resources from what they would normally be doing on a daily basis, including our senior leadership team, like the county manager, deputy county manager, and all of our division directors. They're also focused on this, I think, more than they would be in other times. So the indirect costs are there. We're starting to see some impacts in terms of our contractors. Actually, interestingly enough, we've had several contractors on some transportation construction projects just reach out saying that they have had impacts to their staffing, and so there's potential future challenges with staffing projects if this continues for a long duration. And then this has been touched on, but just the cost in terms of like employee and resident and client, morale. A lot of folks we hear from at the county, just there's just a feeling of not feeling safe, which is, resulting in people wanting, alternate work arrangements or just not feeling like they can come into work. We have some of our staff they said that, they come to work with their passport now because they don't want to be without documentation in case something would happen. So while the financial costs haven't really presented themselves yet, I think we're going to see the costs of this in other ways for a while.
Thanks, Will. I would ask Kevin and Ling. Will stated that he has, in Dakota County, they have not seen a particular uptick in costs associated with the sheriff department. Is that true in Washington County, Kevin, and Ramsey County, Ling?
Yeah, that's the same here for our sheriff's department. I think going back to this idea that immigration enforcement is not a local government responsibility. Our sheriff has taken that position. We sometimes incur costs for things that are happening in the metro area when we're asked to provide mutual aid. And Lincoln, kind of correct me if I'm wrong here, but sometimes Ramsey County gets pulled into Hennepin County to help, and then we get pulled into Ramsey County to backfill since Ramsey County is moving out of that area. And so that happened a lot during the George Floyd incident, and we haven't seen that yet. So we haven't been asked to uh, kind of mobilize a lot of our local law enforcement related to this activity yet. That doesn't say it might not happen because there's a lot of agreements within the local government, local law enforcement to make sure we provide help to each other. And so if that happens, we certainly would. But right now, we haven't seen that.
Thanks. Ling.
Yeah, I would agree with Kevin. I think for us, I don't believe our sheriff has incurred a lot of costs with this, but I do think I think over the weekend we might have helped with like the 911 calls in Minneapolis, but the sheriff's office is their own elected office and able to make some of those decisions themselves too as to when they support. So yeah.
Well, thanks for
Yeah.
those insights. So, we're moving toward the close here. I would like to give each of our panelists an opportunity to make some closing remarks, basically on whatever thoughts come to your mind, kind of related to tonight's event, and especially helping us, league members and our colleagues. We like good information and we like to know what to do with it. And ideas for what we can do with the information we've gotten from you. I mean, that's always a bonus for us. And maybe Ling, I'll give you the first thought there.
Yeah, thanks. Again, really grateful to spend a little time with you all. I really appreciate people who are interested enough to want to have a thoughtful discussion about some of the complexities of, the way we ensure that people get these really critical services in our community. Like I said, you guys are are they conduits for people to ask good questions, and that's sometimes that's missing in our society today with the speed of information. So I would just encourage you all to continue to track the work of all the levels of government, and be advocates for making sure that that we're really thoughtful about not only what we do for people to be to thrive in their communities, but kind of how it's done, and who's paying for it. Those things are all really important. So thank you.
Thanks, Ling. And Will, how about your thoughts?
Yeah, I would just say, you know, trying to communicate and continue to educate on and understand the role of county government in Minnesota. I forget who mentioned it earlier, but a lot of times the county, the city, the school district, the special districts, a lot of like what we do gets conflated, or who's assessing the taxes gets conflated. So I think just continuing to spread that knowledge and really understanding how the different, units of local government operate and function, both in partnership but distinctly from one another. And then I think this is venue has been awesome. At Dakota County, we're trying to increase the amount of public engagement that we do on the budget process and on property taxes. So just encouraging everyone to continue to get involved, continue to come to open houses, public meetings. I think that public engagement is the lifeblood of democracy and what we do as public servants. So I would just continue to urge you to advocate that. So thank you for having me tonight. I thought this was a great discussion, and appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Thanks. Okay, Kevin, now you get to have the last word.
Oh my gosh, so much pressure. I am not going to do this justice, but
You
I would
didn't have
say,
enough pressure at work today, so
yeah, that's right. That's right. I would echo the comments of both Will and Ling. Appreciate everybody that took your evening today to listen to us talk about county government. I think that's a good sign, and it kind of warms my heart to see that people are interested in what we're doing. I over my time at the county, I think we've seen a little bit of waning in the interest in county government. Fewer people coming to board meetings or coming to talk about issues that we're working on. There's not a lot of local press any longer that covers the work that we do, so you aren't hearing about it in your local newspapers, which is unfortunate. But I am really happy in that we've got a very active Woodbury and Cottage Grove area League of Women Voters right now, and they are sending people to the county board meetings each week, and it's made a difference. It makes a difference in how we prepare our materials, how we communicate at the board. The interaction between those people and the county board has been fantastic. So I appreciate the League of Women Voters getting involved. They've also played a huge role in supporting our election staff. Elections administration has been difficult the last 5, 6 years. And I know the League of Women Voters has been very helpful in supporting our staff and communicating about the great job that gets done and the fair and secure elections that happen in all of the counties in Minnesota. So I appreciate the work that they're doing. I love seeing them in the audience at the board meetings each week. And, I would just encourage people to reach out to us. We're more than happy to talk about county government and what we're doing. Because as Ling said, I think you are great advocates for us and can be great messengers in our communities, and we need more of that. So appreciate it. And again, thank you for having us tonight.
well, thanks very much, Kevin. Um, I want to give a, um, a huge thank you to our panelists. They too stayed late, took time away from their families and friends to share this important knowledge. Thank you, Kevin, Will, Ling. It's just such, we're so grateful to you. I would also like to thank Marty Mix from the League of Women Voters. She is our Zoom host for tonight, and she carried that burden. And I'd also like to thank Thana Ross, Gwen Willems, and Lynn Marcus, and they facilitated our arrangements for having our panelists speak. You know, these things, they don't just happen. People have to reach out and work together. So, with those remarks and a final thank you to our panelists and to all of the audience members who tuned in, we are recording this program and we will be making it available in the future for friends and family who missed it.